I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. The morning light crept slowly through the thin slits of our bedroom curtains, glancing off the framed photos of beach vacations and holiday parties, now just hollow relics of a life I thought we were still living. My gaze lingered on a shot of Sarah and me from our 10th anniversary, arms wrapped around each other, laughing. It felt surreal to think that the woman in that picture was the same one who had shattered my world just hours earlier. I hadn't slept. The couch had become my bed for the night, its thin cushions no match for the weight in my chest. I wanted to say I felt angry, maybe betrayed, but numbness was all that I could muster. My mind drifted back to the previous evening, replaying the moment I stumbled upon the first signs of her betrayal. It had been an ordinary Thursday evening, one where we'd both come home tired but happy to just be with each other. Or so I thought. Sarah had been in the shower, and her phone lay on the kitchen counter. I had never been one to pry, trust was the foundation of our marriage. But then a series of messages from a contact named Mark flashed on her screen. One after the other, each ding felt like a needle pressing into my skin. And, driven by something I couldn't explain, I picked it up and read the texts. It was all there, spelled out in language no one could mistake. Passionate promises and inside jokes, bits of shared plans. They had been meeting, and it was clear that their connection went beyond the casual, strictly work conversations she'd always reassured me about. Each word hit me like a punch, every phrase a betrayal of everything I thought we'd built. I remembered the strange calmness that settled over me as she came downstairs, freshly showered and wrapped in her robe, her hair still damp. She looked surprised to see me holding her phone. And then her face changed, a flash of guilt, quickly masked by something that looked more like exasperation than regret. Like I had inconvenienced her by discovering her secret. "Is there something you want to tell me, Sarah?" My voice was steady, but my hands trembled. Her eyes darted to the phone in my hand, and then she sighed, a small, defeated sound. "Look, it was a mistake, okay?" She brushed past me, pouring herself a glass of water. "I don't expect you to understand. But maybe I just needed something exciting. Something new." Her words felt like a slap. She was saying these things so easily, as if this mistake was something trivial, forgivable, like forgetting an anniversary or leaving the car lights on. I couldn't wrap my head around how someone could casually dismiss such a betrayal. All I could do was stare at her, feeling the pieces of my life falling apart in slow motion. "And you just assumed I'd be okay with this?" I finally managed to say, each word heavy with the weight of my disbelief. "It's not that simple," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't think you'd find out, for one thing." She took a sip of her water, as if this was just another conversation, another routine disagreement. "I love you, but, sometimes love needs something more." Something more. The words tasted bitter as they left my mouth. Something more than 12 years of marriage, Sarah. More than building a life together, trusting each other. She set the glass down and looked at me, her face softening for a moment. I almost saw a glimpse of the woman I'd married, the one I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But then she looked away again, and I knew that whatever we'd had, she had already given it away to someone else. That night, she slept in our bed while I lay awake on the couch, my mind racing with a mix of shock and anger, sadness and resignation. Part of me felt like I was watching someone else's life unravel, like I was just a witness to my own pain, detached and numb. I wanted to hate her, to scream, to throw her things out of the house. But all I could do was lie there, staring at the ceiling and feeling a hollow ache where my heart used to be. As dawn broke, casting soft light across the room, I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't go on like this. She had made her choices, and it was time I made mine. I couldn't let her keep taking pieces of me, couldn't let her stay in my life, pretending everything was fine when it was so far from it. She had wanted freedom, so I would give it to her, but on my terms, not hers. When she finally came downstairs, her expression softened in what looked like relief when she saw me. Maybe she thought I'd just pretend everything was okay, that I'd forgive her because I didn't want to lose her. I could see in her face that she still felt in control, as if she believed this was something we could sweep under the rug, maybe go to counseling and move past it. But I was done pretending. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the steam rising in the cool morning air, and motioned for her to sit down. Her expression changed as she took the seat across from me, like she could sense the shift in me, the resolve that had settled into my bones over the course of the night. "Sarah," I began, keeping my voice calm. "I want you out by the end of the month." She looked stunned, as if she hadn't thought I'd be capable of taking that step. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice wavering. "It was a mistake, just a mistake. We can work this out." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. "You wanted freedom, didn't you? To find yourself, or whatever it was you thought you needed. Well, here's your chance." I kept my voice steady, though every word cut into me like a knife. "You wanted something more, so go find it. But you're not going to find it here. Not in this house, not with me." She reached across the table, her eyes wide with desperation. "Please, just give me a chance. We can fix this. I'll end things with him, I swear. I made a mistake, and I'll make it right. Just don't throw everything away." For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something, maybe an echo of the love I used to feel for her. But it was quickly replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't my choice, she'd made it for both of us the moment she stepped into someone else's arms. "Sarah, I didn't throw anything away. You did." My voice was soft but unwavering. "You made your choice when you decided that excitement was worth more than the life we built. Now it's time for you to live with it." She looked down, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. But I didn't feel the pity I thought I would. If anything, her tears only confirmed what I already knew, she hadn't really thought about the cost of her actions, the damage she'd done. I stood up, leaving her sitting at the kitchen table with her untouched cup of coffee. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that couldn't be unsaid. I turned toward the door, not looking back, feeling the weight of the past 12 years settle behind me. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who didn't understand the value of what we'd had. And as much as it hurt, I knew that letting her go was the only choice I had left to make. The days that followed our conversation were a blur of logistics, packing boxes, and silent dinners. Each night, I slept on the couch, the once comforting embrace of our bed now a distant memory. Sarah moved around the house as if in a trance, her movement slow, as though the reality of what she'd lost was finally setting in. But I could tell she still didn't understand the depth of her betrayal, or maybe she did, and just couldn't bring herself to acknowledge it. I threw myself into the routine, letting it ground me while everything else fell apart. I'd get up early, make a quick breakfast, and head out to work without so much as a word to her. At first, she'd try to say good morning or ask how I was doing, but I never replied. Eventually, she stopped trying. On the fourth day, as I was about to leave for work, Sarah stopped me in the hallway. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was tied back loosely, strands falling in disarray. She looked tired, older, somehow. "Thomas, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been together for so long. Can't we just talk about this? Really talk?" I stood there, holding my car keys, feeling the anger simmer beneath the surface. "Talk about what, Sarah? About how you thought it was okay to throw away 12 years for a fling? It wasn't like that." Her voice was pleading now, desperate. "I don't even know why it happened, okay? I felt like I needed something different, something exciting. And now I see how stupid that was. I want to fix this, Thomas. I want us to go back to the way we were." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "There's no going back after what you did. You don't get to just play with someone else and then come home like nothing happened. Her eyes filled with tears, and she stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I took a step back, refusing to let her close the distance. I could feel the frustration building in me, threatening to spill over. But we've been through so much together, she whispered. We've made it through every fight, every struggle. We can make it through this too. I looked at her, trying to see the woman I'd loved, the one who had once been my best friend. But all I saw was the betrayal, the nights I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently to keep her by my side. And I realized that no matter what she said, no matter how many times she apologized, that trust was gone. I don't think you get it, Sarah. My voice was low, calm, but filled with an icy certainty. You took everything we built and crushed it. You chose to lie, to betray the trust we spent years building. And now you want me to pretend like it's all fine? That we can somehow fix this? Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I was so stupid, Thomas. I know that now. I know I hurt you. I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't mean anything, but it did. It meant everything. I was wrong. So wrong. I watched her, a strange mixture of anger and pity welling up inside me. It would have been so easy to take her back, to forgive her, to go back to the comfortable familiarity of our life together. But I knew that was impossible. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too profound. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, leaving her cries echoing in the empty hallway. I drove to work, trying to shake off the feeling of finality that weighed heavy on my chest. The drive was short, and yet it felt endless. Every corner, every stoplight, every stretch of road reminded me of the life we'd shared, a life that now seemed distant, like a story I'd read long ago and have forgotten. At work, my co-workers noticed the change in me. I'd always been steady, focused, the kind of guy who kept things together no matter what. But now, I felt myself unraveling. I'd stare blankly at my computer screen, the words and numbers blurring together as my thoughts drifted to Sarah and what we'd lost. My boss, a kindly older man named Carl, pulled me aside one afternoon, his brow creased with concern. Thomas, you seem different lately, he said, his voice gentle. Is everything all right? I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him I was fine, but the words caught in my throat. I'd been carrying this burden alone for days, letting it eat away at me in silence. And now, for some reason, I felt the need to tell someone, to let it out. My wife. Sarah, she cheated on me. The words sounded hollow, strange, as though they belonged to someone else. Carl placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression sympathetic. I'm sorry, Thomas. That's a heavy thing to go through. I can't imagine how much it's hurting you. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. It's just, we were together for 12 years, Carl. I thought we had something solid, something real. And then, out of nowhere, she throws it all away. I don't know how to even begin to process it. Carl nodded thoughtfully, his gaze distant. Sometimes, people make choices they can't take back. And it's not your fault, Thomas. Don't let this break you. You're stronger than this. His words lingered with me throughout the day, a small comfort in the midst of the storm. But when I returned home that evening, the reality of my situation crashed down on me once more. The house was dark, quiet, the once warm and welcoming space now cold and empty. I found Sarah sitting at the dining room table, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. I don't know how to do this, she murmured, barely meeting my gaze. I don't know how to let go. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my own sadness settle into my bones. You already let go, Sarah. The moment you chose him over us, you let go. She flinched, her hand trembling as she set down the glass. It was just a stupid mistake, Thomas. I never stopped loving you. But you stopped respecting me. The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and unyielding. You took our life, our marriage, and treated it like it was disposable. Like I was disposable. She stood up, walking over to where I stood, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I took a step back, creating a distance between us that felt like miles. I don't know how to make this right, she whispered. I don't know how to fix it. You can't, I replied, my voice soft but resolute. There's no fixing this, Sarah. You did what you did, and now we both have to live with it. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, defeated. I'll start packing, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. As she moved toward the stairs, a strange sense of finality settled over me. It was over, truly over, and as painful as that realization was, it also brought a sense of relief. I was free, from her lies, from the weight of her betrayal, from the broken promises we'd once shared. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty glass she'd left behind. In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in days. The life I'd known was gone, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to start again. The weekend finally arrived, but it was far from a reprieve. Instead, it loomed over me, an empty space where the noise of routine used to drown out everything else. The silence in the house was deafening, filled with echoes of laughter and whispered conversations that no longer held meaning. I busied myself with mundane tasks, things I would normally have let pile up, as if cleaning out the garage or sorting old bills could somehow clear away the wreckage of my life. By midday Saturday, I found myself in my home office, trying to lose myself in a backlog of work I'd been ignoring all week. The steady tapping of the keyboard was strangely comforting, filling the void. It was then, mid-email, that I heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway. I knew she'd come to collect some of her things, but still, her presence felt like an unwelcome intrusion, a reminder that this wasn't just some bad dream. I didn't look up when she entered the house, her soft footsteps moving carefully through the entryway. I could hear her hesitate in the hallway, and for a moment, I thought she might turn around and leave. But then she went upstairs, her steps echoing as she made her way to her old bedroom. Minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. I tried to ignore her presence, to block out the sounds of drawers opening, zippers being drawn, items placed into bags. It should have felt final, like closure, but instead it felt like I was watching her disappear in pieces, as if she was dismantling the last remnants of our shared life with each item she took. Finally, unable to focus on anything, I went into the kitchen to make coffee, the comforting smell filling the air. It was a routine we'd shared so many times, our Sunday mornings filled with the quiet warmth of fresh coffee and lazy conversations about nothing in particular. I poured myself a cup, sipping slowly, letting the warmth anchor me in the present. But the memories lingered, impossible to shake. Thomas? Her voice startled me, softer than I'd ever heard it. I turned to find her standing in the doorway, a small suitcase by her side and a look of uncertainty on her face. What is it, Sarah? I kept my tone neutral, refusing to let her see the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, the tension in my chest easing slightly. Sorry isn't going to change anything, I said, my voice flat but steady. You made your choice. She nodded, a sadness settling over her features. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me, Thomas. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I regret it. I regret all of it. Her words hung in the air, fragile and weighty. For a moment, I almost believed her, almost let myself think that maybe, somewhere beneath the layers of betrayal and lies, there was a part of her that still cared. But the wounds were too fresh, too deep to be soothed by empty apologies. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sarah," I replied, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "What's done is done." She looked up, meeting my gaze, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, guilt, maybe, or a faint trace of the love we used to share. "I'll go," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Goodbye, Thomas." I didn't respond, didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't shatter the fragile calm I'd managed to maintain. Instead, I watched as she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. The silence that followed was both a relief and a burden, a hollow echo of the life we'd left behind. Hours passed, the daylight waning, and I found myself wandering through the house, each room a reminder of what we once had. The living room, where we'd spent countless evenings curled up on the couch, lost in movies and conversations that seemed endless at the time. The dining room, where we'd hosted friends, celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, creating memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else. I reached our bedroom, the last room I hadn't been able to bring myself to enter since our conversation that morning. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, the familiar scent of lavender and cedar filling the air. I could still see traces of her everywhere, the half-empty bottle of her favorite perfume on the dresser, the hairpin forgotten on the nightstand, the indents in the pillow that had once been hers. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap as I took in the room, every detail etched into my memory. It was here, in this room, that we had built our life, shared our dreams, our fears, our love. And now it was nothing but a hollow shell, a painful reminder of everything that had been taken from me. A surge of anger bubbled up, a wave of resentment I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. I thought about the moments she'd stolen, the promises she'd broken, the future she'd destroyed. I clenched my fists, the anger consuming me, hot and blinding. Without thinking, I grabbed the pillow from her side of the bed, hurling it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft thud, landing in a crumpled heap on the floor. It wasn't enough, though, not nearly enough to release the fury and hurt that clawed at my insides. I wanted to scream, to break something, to let out the rage that had been building for days. But all I could do was sit there, the anger slowly fading into an overwhelming sense of loss. I buried my face in my hands, the weight of the grief pressing down on me like a leaden shroud. It was late when I finally pulled myself together, the room shrouded in darkness. I switched on the bedside lamp, casting a soft, warm glow across the room. I knew that I couldn't stay here, couldn't keep living in a space filled with memories that would only tear me apart. I needed to reclaim this space, to make it mine. I spent the rest of the night gathering her remaining belongings, the small remnants she'd left behind. The photo frames, the jewelry on the dresser, the clothes in the closet, each item carefully packed away in boxes. It felt like an act of reclaiming, of taking back the pieces of myself she'd stolen. When I was done, I sat on the floor amidst the boxes, exhaustion settling over me like a heavy blanket. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, one that came with the faint glimmer of closure. I'd taken the first step, however small, toward moving forward. The next morning, I loaded her things into my car and drove them to a storage unit I'd rented, leaving them there as a final act of separation. As I locked the door, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if I was finally cutting the last thread that had bound me to her. She was gone, and for the first time, I felt the faintest stirrings of hope, a whisper of a new beginning waiting just beyond the horizon. Driving back, I rolled down the windows, letting the crisp morning air fill the car. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm, golden light across the landscape. For the first time in weeks, I felt a hint of peace, a quiet assurance that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild. When I returned home, I brewed myself a fresh cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table and savoring the simple pleasure of the moment. The house was empty, silent, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a blank canvas, a space that I could fill with new memories, new beginnings. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I'd ever find love again or if the wound Sarah had left would ever fully heal. But as I sat there, sipping my coffee in the soft morning light, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to start over. And for the first time, that thought didn't fill me with fear, but with the faintest spark of hope. In the days that followed, I settled into the emptiness of the house. There was a strange peace in the quiet, a solace I hadn't anticipated. Sarah's absence was no longer an open wound but a scar, healing slowly over the days and weeks. Each room I walked through, each corner I tidied, each piece of her I packed away, it was like I was reclaiming not only my home but also my life. The first real sign of moving on came when I decided to repaint my bedroom. Gone were the soft pastels Sarah had insisted on, replaced by cool, neutral tones. It was a small change, but each stroke of the brush felt like erasing a part of the life we'd shared, making room for something new, even if I didn't know what that would be. One late afternoon, after a long day at work, I got a message from an old friend, David. We hadn't spoken in years, but he'd heard about the split from a mutual friend. He was kind and offered to take me out for a drink. We met at a local bar, and as I sipped my beer and listened to his stories about work and family, it felt refreshing to talk to someone who knew me before all this. I laughed for the first time in what felt like ages, letting the tension in my shoulders ease. Maybe I could find my way back to myself, one drink, one conversation at a time. David eventually convinced me to join him at a weekend fishing trip upstate. It was something I would have hesitated about before, but now it felt like a lifeline. We left early Saturday morning, and as we headed out of the city, I felt a weight lifting, as if the city and all it held for me were fading in the rearview mirror. The trip was just what I needed. The lake was serene, and the quiet solitude of the woods gave me time to reflect. I sat on the edge of the dock that night, looking up at a sky full of stars, letting myself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since my world had turned upside down. David stayed on the shore, giving me space, and in that silence, I thought that maybe there was a way forward. The lake, the sky, the trees, they felt untouched by the pain I'd been carrying, and they reminded me that life existed outside my own wounds. Returning home felt different after that. I no longer dreaded the quiet, the echo of empty rooms. They weren't filled with memories anymore but with possibilities. I began to make plans, small ones at first. Maybe I'd start jogging in the mornings again, try cooking something new, perhaps even take a trip somewhere. The idea of a future was something I could finally hold on to, fragile but real. But then, one evening, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen, and my heart sank. It was Sarah. I hadn't heard from her since she'd picked up her things, and seeing her name felt like a ghost from a past I was trying to bury. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, letting her slip back into the silence. But something stopped me, a curiosity maybe, or a sense of unfinished business. I answered, holding the phone to my ear, bracing myself. "Thomas," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know how to say this." "What is it, Sarah?" My tone was colder than I intended, but the distance between us felt necessary, like armor. There was a pause, and then a choked sob escaped her. I'm sick. I just found out last week. It's bad, Thomas." Her words hit me like a punch, the weight of them settling in slowly, heavy and unrelenting. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the revelation that the woman I had spent a decade with, the woman who had betrayed me, was now facing something beyond either of our control. "I didn't know who else to call," she continued, her voice breaking. "I don't have anyone else, not like you, Thomas. I don't deserve it, but I need help." 1,000 emotions rushed through me, anger, pity, confusion. But in the end, something else rose above them all, a sense of duty, a pull that came from somewhere deep within me, a place untouched by bitterness or betrayal. "Where are you?" I asked, the words falling out before I could think them through. She told me her address, a small apartment in a part of town we'd never lived in together, a place I'd never seen. I drove there that night, unsure of what I would find, unsure of what I was even doing. But somehow, I knew that I had to see her, to face this, whatever it was. When I arrived, she looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her once bright hair dull and thin. She greeted me with a sad smile, and in that moment, all the anger, all the resentment I'd felt toward her faded into something else. This wasn't the woman who had betrayed me, this was someone I'd once loved, someone who was now broken in ways I could barely comprehend. We spent that night talking, not about us, not about what had happened, but about everything else. She told me about her diagnosis, about the months of pain and uncertainty she'd been hiding from everyone, the fear that gripped her every time she thought about the future. And for the first time since she'd left, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was a conversation we needed, a moment of connection that felt real and raw, even if it was too late for reconciliation. Over the next few weeks, I became her anchor, the person she called when the pain became unbearable, when the loneliness became too much to bear. I took her to appointments, held her hand through procedures, sat with her through long nights of silence. And with each passing day, I felt the bitterness dissolve, replaced by a quiet acceptance. She was my past, a part of me that I could never fully let go. One night, as she lay in bed, weak and tired, she reached out, her hand trembling as it found mine. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear. "Thank you. For everything." I swallowed, my throat tight. "You don't need to thank me, Sarah." "Yes, I do," she said, her eyes searching mine. "I know what I did to you, how I hurt you. And I can never take that back. But you came back to me, even after everything. I don't deserve it, but, thank you." I nodded, unable to speak, the weight of her words settling into my heart. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her, that all the pain and anger were gone, replaced by something softer, something that felt like love, even if it was broken and bruised. But the words wouldn't come, so I just held her hand, letting the silence speak for me. She passed away a few days later, her hand still in mine, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. The grief hit me like a tidal wave, sweeping me into a darkness I hadn't anticipated. I thought I'd lost her when she betrayed me, but it was only in her final moments that I realized how much I still loved her, how much I'd never stopped loving her, even after everything. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier than ever, the silence now filled with memories of those last weeks together, the echoes of conversations I'd never have again. I thought I'd found peace, a way forward, but instead, I was left with an ache that seemed impossible to fill, a sadness that would follow me for the rest of my life. In the end, she had left me twice, once by choice, and once by fate. And as I sat in the quiet of my empty house, the realization settled over me like a shroud: some wounds never heal, and some love never fades, no matter how broken it may be.